Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to the stream. I hope I can wait for a couple of minutes. I will give it a couple of minutes before we really begin, just so more people can join the stream. So let's wait. By the way, what I want to do in this stream is walk through the historical and methodological question carefully. The question is, what did the earliest Christians actually believe about Jesus? Before later creeds, before councils, and before theological systems were fully developed. While we are waiting for people to join, feel free to let me know in the chat where you are watching from, what's your background, and so and just a quick note. I won't be responding to comment debates in the chat during this. Can you hear me now? Uh, if the audio is good, okay, it's good. I think. Okay. Yeah, hello, brother. Thank you. Quranist and Nestorian. Hmm. God bless you. God bless you. Okay, okay then. Like I said, I will give it a couple of minutes before we really begin. I want more people to join. It's kind of funny that even the lowest Christology in early Christianity was still higher than Islam. No Muslim believes Jesus rules as king on God's right hand. Every early Christian did. Yeah, that's true. That's a fact. Yeah, that's true. He's asking, "Are you Turkish?" I'm living in Turkey, but I am Aramean, not Turkish. So, in case, but yeah, my main language is Aramaic and Turkish. Yeah, that's okay. I do not have any problem with that. Yeah, God bless you, brother. God bless you. Yeah, I born as a Christian into a Christian family. Yeah, that's true. Shalom Aleichem. In Syriac, Aramaic, we say Shlomo Aloch. we say. By the way, questions are welcome, but as I said, I will only engage with them after the main talk and only if they relate directly to the method or the historical data. Okay? We are trying to understand the Second Temple Judaism. Um, so yeah, I can do it right now if you want, but if you want a real detailed recommendation video, I can drop it if you want. I follow Dr. Rocco Erico. He has done a lot of work on the Aramaic reading of the Bible. I didn't hear about him, but if you say so, uh, I can research about him. So, guys, let's get started slowly. So, the question is Jesus God is, usually asked as a theological question, right? Today, I want to treat it first as a historical and methodological question. Not what do I believe, not what should I believe, not like we believe, but what do the early sources actually allow us to say? Um, Before that, by the way, I will mention this once and then move on. The channel isn't monetized yet. If anyone wants to support the work I am doing or send private questions, there is a buy me a coffee link in the description and in the pinned comment in the chat. So, all right, now let's actually begin. The title of the stream Is Jesus God? But I don't want to start with later creeds, later councils, or even later theological vocabulary. The best way to do this responsibly is to start with a controlled test case, an early gospel text where the issue is not what doctrine do you prefer, but what reading is methodologically allowed. So I want to begin with the opening of the Gospel of Mark because Mark doesn't start by giving you a long theory. He starts by framing Jesus' identity through Israel's own scriptures, through the Old Testament. That means we can ask a very sharp question right away. When Mark quotes prophetic language about the Lord, the Yahweh, and applies it to the story he is telling about Jesus, what does the text itself allow us to conclude, and what does it not allow? Okay, so let me open Mark chapter 1. Just a second. Yeah, can you see the screen? The chapter. A second. Muslims ask how is Jesus God and man, but they never answer how is the Bible uncorrupted when it agrees with Islam and uncorrupted when it debunks Islam. One book, two natures. That's right. That's a good analogy. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah, we see. Okay, okay. So let me. Okay, so you see that in chapter 1, verse 2 to 3, John the Baptist is identified as the messenger, right? Not a symbolic figure, not a representative of another person who is the real messenger, but John himself is the messenger in a literal sense. That point is not disputed by anyone, Jewish, Muslim, or Unitarian. So John the Baptist is literally the messenger, and the action he performs is also literal, preparing the way. Preparing the way is a concrete historical act carried out in real time in reality history. Again, no symbolic language. We don't see any symbolic language introduced here. The text treats both the subject performing the action and the action itself as literal, right? So let me clarify this by making it a formal. Uh, thing. Just a second. Let me open a Notion. Okay. Just a second. Can you see the screen? Mm, Let me write example. Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay. So you see, let X denote the action preparing the way. Okay. Let me write it. Let X denote the action preparing the way. Okay. And the agent, the messenger, is John the Baptist. Right. And also he performs. Just a second. He performs X. Performs X. Right. And X is literal. X is literal. It refers. Let me rephrase that like this. It refers to a concrete, concrete historical action. Historical action, right? A historical action occurring at a specific point in time, right? And by the way, let me see the comments. Okay, no problem. And in conclusion, John performs X with the respect to the way of the Lord, right? The way of the Lord. This formally. So we said, let me clarify it. We said that let X denote the action preparing the way, and our agent is, in a literal sense, John the Baptist, who performs the action of X, preparing the way. And we see X is also literal. It refers to a concrete historical action, right? Then here, John performs X with respect to the way of the Lord, right? Now, here's the methodological question. The methodological question that cannot be avoided. So, if this verse is not literal, if this verse does not support a Trinitarian reading, on what grounds do we suddenly decide that the text changed its mode of meaning precisely at the most important point, when we reach the subject of the action? Why is John literal, the act literal, but the one whose why is being prepared suddenly metaphorical or symbolical? What principle justifies that shift, right? And this is not a theological question yet. This is a cumulative, a hermeneutical one. So if a text is read literally with the respect to the agent and the action, methodological consistency requires that the object of the action be read in the same mode, unless the text itself signals otherwise, right? And here it doesn't. The problem is it doesn't give such a signal. There is no linguistic marker, no symbolic qualifier. The metaphor is not drawn from the text. It is introduced from outside the text. It is a back reading, an anachronistic reading included in the text. That means the interpretation is not text driven, it is framework driven. It comes from a person's bias. Now, to be very clear, this is not a Trinitarian shortcut, okay? This is actually the opposite of that. I'm not saying Jesus is divine, therefore this must be literal. That would be a special pleading fallacy. What I am saying is this: if the text does not provide criteria for switching from literal to metaphorical or symbolical, then doing so is methodologically unjustified, regardless of my theology, your theology. And this is precisely where Unitarian and Muslim readings struggle, not because they reject the conclusion, but because they cannot justify the method that gets them there. According to what justification you can read the verse like this, right? So if the text does not support a high Christological reading, if Jesus is just a representative agent of Yahweh in this text, then the correct scholarly response is not to impose a metaphorical escape hatch. The correct response is to acknowledge that tension and deal with it honestly. Anything else is not interpretation, it's protection of a prior conclusion. And that is something we should all resist, no matter if we are Trinitarian, Unitarian, Muslim, Jehovah Witnesses, Oneness Pentecostals, no matter which word we belong to. Because once interpretation becomes selective, we are no longer asking what the text says, we are only asking how to make the text say what we already believe, right? Is there a problem in sound? If it's good, I'm continuing. Peace and love of Jesus Christ to all. God bless you, Maria. Thank you. Hey, Kyrios. Thank you, Anthony. Welcome, brother. Okay, sound is good. Okay, okay then. So I hope you understand the point. If you didn't, I can clarify more. Um, and you can hear a response, and I often hear at this point, goes something like this: the response. So they say Jesus is described through the New Testament as the way. So this passage is simply saying that Jesus is the way of Yahweh, not Yahweh himself. However, this response is simply begging the question. It does not actually address the methodological problem in the verse itself. Instead, it attempts to conceal that problem by appealing to a later theological phrase. And by the way, to be clear, the issue here is not that the Gospel of John is late. We affirm the Gospel of John. Chronology is not the objection, not the problem. The problem is categorical. When John describes Jesus as the way, he is doing so within a clearly theological and soteriological framework. The phrase functions doctrinally. Jesus is the way in the sense that believing in him and obeying him leads to salvation. That is not a literal identification claim about a historical action taking place in time, right? It is a theological articulation of salvation. However, as we see in Mark, Mark is doing something entirely different. He is making a literal identification claim about a historical action taking place in a moment, in a time. It's not a theological articulation of salvation. So Mark's use of the verse is not soteriological, but as you can see, it's identificational. The passage states a historical messenger, a literal messenger, performing a concrete action, a literal action, which you see we denoted it as X within a real historical sequence, right? This is not a theological abstraction. The text is clear. The method is clear. It is an identity framing narrative. So, trying to import John's theological usage back into Mark does not solve the problem. In fact, it creates one. Even if one insists that the way in Mark should be read metaphorically, the problem still remains. The messenger is literal. John the Baptist is literally that messenger. The historical setting is also literal. The action of preparing is also literal. Only the subject is suddenly redefined. Only the Lord is suddenly redefined. And that selective mode collapses the structure of the verse, because at that point the text is no longer, it doesn't has a coherent semantic type. A verse cannot function as a historical and identification narrative and a purely symbolic theological statement without explicit markers indicating such a shift. Mark provides no such markers. You see? So the issue is not whether similar language or the same phrase appears elsewhere in the New Testament. The issue is whether Mark himself gives us any methodological justification for switching interpretive modes mid-verse. But the problem is he does not. And without that justification, appealing to later theological language is not a comment. It is question begging, as I said. So once we admit this, the discussion has to move forward. We can't stay at the level of surface phrases anymore. If Mark offers no internal justification for a metaphorical shift, then the Muslim or the Unitarian have only two honest options left. Either accept the implications of a consistent reading, or openly acknowledge or openly admit that an external framework is being imposed on the text, which is anachronistic reading, right? There's no third option. There's no third option that preserves methodological integrity. Did you get the problem in the Unitarian and Muslim reading? You can say in the chat if you didn't understand the argument. You can say so. I can clarify more. You know that English is not my main language, but I'm trying to be clear as more I can. Okay, brother. So let me drink some water. So now this is the point also where Richard Bauckham becomes absolutely central to the discussion. And by the way, I want to be very clear, very, very clear. I'm not appealing to Bauckham as an authority to end the debate. Okay? I am appealing to him because he helps us clarify the category mistake we have been circling around. So let me put this on the screen. Just a second. Okay, just a second, a moment. Okay, you can see the screen. So you see that's from Richard Bauckham's book, Jesus and the God of Israel, page 8. Okay, now what Bauckham argues is that many modern discussions completely misunderstand how Jewish monotheism actually worked in the Second Temple period, right? The focus was not on abstract questions like what is divinity made of, but on a much more concrete question: who is the God of Israel? This is the question, and that distinction matters a lot. Why? Because in Second Temple Judaism, God was not defined by metaphysical traits. God was defined by identity. And that identity was marked by specific, unique characteristics that belong to God alone, that belong to the Most High God alone. So let me zoom for this. Okay. Can you read the screen? So, okay, I'm continuing. So, one of the most important of this, you see, as Bauckham emphasized, you can see it highlighted here, is creation, right? God alone creates. No one assists him. No intermediary participates in creation. And Bauckham says very clearly, this is axiomatic for Second Temple Judaism. It is not a later Christian idea. It is not controversial. It's a shared Jewish assumption, right? So now pause for a moment and think about what this means for our discussion. If if Jewish monotheism already had clear criteria for identifying who God is, criteria that sharply distinguish God from all other reality, then the question is no longer whether early Christians used divine language closely. The question becomes what happens when those identity markers are applied to Jesus? And this is where the representation model starts to collapse, as I showed in Mark chapter 1, and also in chapter 1 of the Gospel of Luke, in verse 76. The same thing, the same Old Testament prophecy about preparing the way of the Lord, right? So, because if early Christians were simply looking for semi divine intermediaries, angels, or exalted humans, symbolic figures, Judaism already had categories for that. This is a historical fact and a theological fact. Those categories existed, they were well known. However, Bauckham's point is that the early Christians did something much more radical and much more specific. They did not place Jesus next to God, or they did not place Jesus under God as a high agent, what they did is they placed Jesus within the unique identity of the one God of Israel. Let me say this again. They placed Jesus within the unique identity of the one God of Israel. Not by redefining monotheism, but you see, by working inside its existing structure. We see that in Paul's letters in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6, when he redefines, uh, when he expands the Shema, right? The Jewish Shema, and includes Jesus within this unique identity, right? So let me see in the chat if you have questions for a second. Mm. So the Jews that worship Christ after his resurrection still hold to an monotheistic belief, if I understand you right. Yeah, that's completely true. As I said, they included Jesus within this divine identity. Okay. By the way, I have a book written by a Jewish scholar about the father and son theology, about the father son doctrine. He argues that the doctrine that uh, God is father and son was before even Christianity began. It was present in Judaistic worldview. Let me find that book for a second. Um, I think that was okay. I found this. So the book is this. Let me zoom out. It is the Jewish Gospels, the story of the Jewish Christ, written by Daniel Boyarin. It's not a Christian book, by the way. It's written by a Jewish scholar. Okay, so in page, I think 2, mm, I'm trying to find that quote by him. Yeah, it's here. He says, "If only things were this simple. In this book, I am going to tell a very different historical story, a story of a time when Jews and Christians were much more mixed up with each other than they are now. When there were many Jews who believed in something quite like the Father and the Son, and even in something quite like the incarnation of the Son in the Messiah, and when followers of Jesus kept kosher as Jews, and accordingly, a time in which the question of the difference between Judaism and Christianity just didn't exist as it does now." This is not a Christian book, by the way. You can search it up. The writer is a scholar, a Jewish scholar. He writes that there was an idea similar to the father and son doctrine. There was an idea that the son, the son of God, being incarnate in the Messiah. Okay, so these are not later Christian developments. They are not new ideas created by Christians. It was present among the very Jews of the Second Temple in first. So let me clarify this. This is not a Second Temple Judaism book. It talks about first First Temple It's about talking about the first temple period. So I have to clarify this. But you see that there is a idea like the Father and the Son, even before Christianity, long before Christianity, right? Exactly. The truth always comes out. It's true. So you see that Jesus is included in this unique identity of the God of Israel. Even if we read Jewish scholars, not only Christian scholars, right? So let me go back to Richard Bauckham. So as I said that Jesus merely represents God, argument is not true because it cannot explain certain things. It does not account for the data. It explains too little. Representation models were available, as I mentioned, angels, exalted humans, and etc. They were familiar in the Judaistic worldview, and yet they were not used to explain what Christians were doing with Jesus, right? So when we go back to Mark or Paul or early Christian worship, even pre-Pauline traditions, the question shifts again. It's no longer could this be symbolic? It is why are the strongest identity markers of Israel's God being shared, right? And this is not a question that can be answered by metaphor alone or symbolic, right? So from here, there are two natural directions we can go. One is to stay with Bauckham and look at how divine identity functions across multiple New Testament texts. The other is to move historically and ask why this inclusion of Jesus happened so early, far too early for pagan myth making. So that's where I want to go next in the next stream, right? So let me read some comments if there's comments and questions. Just a second. Um, light. What's so? Arcane says the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness swallowed it. Wait, that's not right. The darkness could not overcome it. It could not even comprehend it. Yeah, that's true. That's true, brother. It's completely true. And if you have questions, you can ask in the chat. The channel isn't monetized yet, so there are no super chats. You can ask basically in the chat. And let me give you a couple of minutes. Okay. You can argue this from the Messianic Psalms as well. Yeah, that's true. I will mention that about on the next streams, maybe, God willing. So, can you touch a little bit about intersection? What it What is the point of intercession if God intervenes on behalf of Himself? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of videos about this. For example, Amin Apologetics have a video on this. Let me write it on the chat so you can just a second. Let me post the link. No, it's like 1,200, I think. It's not still 3K. I posted the link. Amin Apologetics made a video about this, and it's very well explained. I suggest his channel too. By the way, you can subscribe his channel. He's making good videos. He's debating Muslims and Unitarians. Uh, so go ahead and subscribe him. Okay, you're welcome, brother. So if there's no more questions, I will stop here for today. The goal of this stream was not to force a conclusion, as you can see. Uh, I want to slow the question down and examine what the earliest text actually allow us to say methodologically and historically. So whether one agrees with the implications or not, I hope it's clear that these texts cannot simply be reduced without cost, without any justification, right? So that's where serious discussions begin. In the next live, hopefully, I'm going to focus on pre-Pauline traditions and pre-Pauline high Christology, early material that already reflects high Christology and is rooted in the Jerusalem Church. Okay, so that discussion is especially important because it moves us even closer to the historical starting point. It's even before the Gospels, the earliest Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels. Okay, great stream. Thank you, brother. Thank you all. Will do, God willing. Okay, yup. Okay, brothers and sisters. Thank you all for coming and watching the stream. If you have questions, private questions, you can ask me through Buy Me a Coffee, and you can support or donate from that link in the description and in the pinned comment. So God bless all. Good night. Thank you.